I'll walk through some administrivia here. Good morning and welcome to another week of go-to-market Friday. We've broadened it from account base, which we've been doing for the last 3 years, and this year we've kind of taken a different tact of go-to-market and strategies around go-to-market. My co-host Meg and I have been doing this for about 4 years now, and in those 4 years we've recorded about 400 videos. In the upper corner you'll see a QR code. That QR code will bring you to those videos. We'd encourage you, if you get value from today's discussion, to like and subscribe to it, pass it on to a friend. When we grow, you grow, and when you grow, we grow. So it would be great if you could click on that QR code and like and subscribe. Today, we've got a great guest joining us from Atlanta. Michael Penon runs global demand generation for G2, and really excited to have him join us. I saw him speak at AI in Action. He had a phenomenal conversation around LinkedIn, around AI. You're in for a real treat today. So with that, Meg, you want to kick things off in terms of questions here?
Yeah, you bet. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm fascinated by your backdrop there. That is a serious collection going on.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions. I also get asked more frequently than not if it's real. It is real. I used to collect masks when I traveled around the world, and then it became a thing where my friends and family also collected masks when they traveled and brought them to me. So yeah, that's the story.
Nice. An army of people around the world bringing you cool stuff so that your calls look more interesting than the rest of ours. Well done. So I would love to hear, you've got a pretty great role, head of demand for G2, somebody that, a company that many of us in marketing have relied on and continue to rely on for a lot of things. I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your role and kind of how you see it fitting into the go-to-market ecosystem at G2.
Yeah. I think one of the coolest things about this role is I came here because I was a previous customer. And so at my last company, SalesLoft, we were big G2 users. And I think like a lot of folks started with reviews and then kind of expanded the use case. And if anybody's familiar with the sales engagement ecosystem, it's highly competitive. And so I've used a lot of different sources of intent data. We started using G2 buyer intent to help us with competitive head-to-heads and takeouts and competitive intelligence on open ops and customers with churn. And so just had a ton of success using it. And when I was ready for my next opportunity, G2 was actually one of only 2 companies I applied to, and it worked out. And so now I've been here almost 3 years. It's been a lot of fun. I think not only has the MarTech and B2B SaaS world changed a lot in that amount of time, especially this year, but we've also reshaped and grown the team. I think we're much more embedded in working with our sales counterparts and like research and product, just because kind of like you mentioned, so much of what G2 does touches so many different parts of go-to-market. So my team here encompasses integrated campaigns and digital programs, actually not even just digital programs, digital channels and advertising strategy like LinkedIn, like Google, account-based platforms, email, customer cross-sell, upsell expansion programs, and then account-based and field marketing. So I'm busy, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, you got a great cat's eye view of what's going on, or bird's eye view of everything there. And I should probably also mention to our audience, if you have a specific question about demand generation or anything here, feel free to pop it into the comments of either Meg's LinkedIn or my own, and we can promote it up into the conversation. So this conversation is as much yours as it is ours. But just thinking about, everything that you're responsible for there, Michael, and I know we want to dive deeply into LinkedIn, but what kind of broad trends are you seeing right now with traffic? Because, at G2, you're kind of also at that bird's eye view of what's happening. And I imagine you're feeling some pressure as demand generation on that traffic metric. But what are you seeing right now from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different factors influencing it, but I think the biggest one overall is just looking at how the buyer's journey is changing. And, no surprise, the biggest one there is AI and the rise of AEO and LLMs, and to some degree, the decline of traditional channels like organic and SEO. But I mean, that's part of it for people like me who sit in this role and have to drive pipeline and leads and revenue. That's the first part of it. But the second part of it also is just looking at how that buyer's journey is changing and making sure that whether it's a customer or whether it's a prospect, we are not only building the new buyers' journeys that get the same results that we need and we're put in our plan, but also just that we're building great experiences while we do it. Like we know now that like 71% of all B2B searches are starting with AI. I mean, that more than doubled in 4 months this year. So the AI trend is real and it's here to stay. And when so many of us, built our funnels and built our programs with more traditional channels, we've got to evolve. And so our team has that conversation every week.
When you think about a resource like LinkedIn that is this incredibly rich repository of the people that most companies want to reach in in particular in B2B, but I would say kind of broadly there's a nice opportunity there for marketing. How do you think about making the most of that investment? Because you've talked about sort of needing to show the ROI on what you're putting into marketing. How are you looking at that for LinkedIn, and what are some of the things you think maybe people get wrong about optimizing that investment?
Yeah. I love this question. It's one of my favorite topics. I think LinkedIn is one of the channels historically that I've not only had the most success using, but also the most fun, if I'm honest with you. There's a couple different things happening. I think if you want to do it right and you want to build a long-term strategy, you have to have a brand and demand play. So you've got to figure out, how are you talking to people at the top of the funnel? How are you running thought leadership and brand awareness? And I think this is a good tie-in really for the intent data as well. But when you get signals and you know that people are shopping in your category or looking at what you do, how do you get in front of them? And one of the other interesting pieces that we talk about a lot here at G2 is, how do you leverage channels that are active versus passive? And the biggest one there is probably email, which is direct to inbox. And I think we all know all of our inboxes are swamped every day. So, if you want to stand out and get out of the inbox, but you still want to make sure that you reach the right audience, I think LinkedIn is one of the best ways to do it. So, you've got to figure out, what part of your budget do you want to break out for brand? What part of your budget do you want to break out for demand? I've been through the painful exercise of having to figure out, how much budget am I willing to invest without direct pipeline source to it. And that's the reality. You've got to spend some money at top of the funnel for clicks and impressions before people are going to be willing to convert on down funnel assets like lead gen and demo requests. So I think the historical breakout, depending on your category and your brand, is like 60-40, 50-50, 55-45, just depending. But be ready to invest, almost half of your budget in brand awareness. And I know that's a hard leap to make for people like me who scrutinize every dollar and want to track it back to pipeline, to revenue, to leads, to opportunities. But know that you're playing the long game. And there's a lot of data that shows, for example, I think on LinkedIn, most people have to see an ad 5 to anywhere from 17 times before they're willing to click on it. Brand marketing on LinkedIn is a much cheaper way to do that, actually, than trying to do it with mid-funnel assets like ebooks and content downloads. So it may take some time. You will ultimately see the results. And I know we're going to get a little bit more into tactics for how that works exactly. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. I know Jason Lemkin came out yesterday with kind of a sharp point of view about demand versus brand. Obviously, as an investor, not as a marketer, I think his point of view was skewed more toward the demand than the brand side. I've been in subsequent conversations. There was a CMO roundtable that I participated in this morning that people had varying views about, how do you position brand? Do you talk about it as brand, or is it another name where you're either creating a category or publishing perhaps your CEO's point of view on LinkedIn. There's
Mhm.
lots of ways to slice and dice that, but there's probably not a lot of debate that there's still that need for that twin
Yeah.
engine of demand with brand.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You had mentioned kind of the different funnel aspects, so the top of the funnel and the different plays.
Mhm.
How do you see signals and intent data playing into that funnel scenario, whether it's in LinkedIn or anything?
Yeah.
Like where do you see the signals coming in?
Yeah. I think this also becomes an interesting conversation around sources of intent data and what type of data you're using where in the funnel. And I think a lot of people like me are like, I think you might have come from the world, which I would say now is a little bit old school of, oh my gosh, like we want to capture every lead and convert them as fast as possible. And back to my point earlier about how the buyer's journey is changing. One of the things we've seen at G2 in our buyer behavior report is most of these companies now who are shopping for any sort of B2B software, they've already made their shortlist, and their shortlist is usually 3 to 4 companies before they ever come inbound. So I think marketers used to have this world where we would think like, oh, wow, somebody's just now entering the market and we have the opportunity to get in front of them and kind of make an impression. But what we're seeing is there's just more and more information available, is people are actually staying in almost the dark part of the journey for longer. They're doing all of their research. They're making a short list, they're reading reviews, and then they come inbound for the 2 or 3 or 4 companies that they're most interested in. So when I think about what that means and how you leverage LinkedIn in the buyer's journey, the most success and the tips, the tip that I provide to most other folks is you really have to build your full funnel in LinkedIn. So when somebody comes in at the top of the funnel and they're just hitting that place where, if you're using an account-based platform, this would probably be something like your product keyword group, like people who are searching for the types of things that you do. So that's a good example of third-party intent. If you're using G2, this would be people who are coming to your category and looking at your category on G2, but maybe they haven't made it to looking at your profile yet. So what that means is these are folks who are in market for what you do, but they don't know you exist yet. So they're at the top of the funnel. Like you want to start talking to them about like what type of solution do you offer? Who is it for? What is the value that you get out of a solution like yours? So that as they're beginning that process and educating themselves, you're showing up as a brand that they may trust. So then I think if you move down into, probably the consideration phase roughly, this is where you want to make sure that you're using the types of intent data that you know who is in market. And that's going to probably be a mix of first and second party intent. So I guess a quick refresher is your first party intent is the data that you have in your ecosystem, and it's proprietary. So this is probably what's in your CRM, things like website visits and contact level data, like conversions on content, all of that stuff that you own that's happening. That's your first party intent data. The best way to think about second party intent data is somebody else's first party intent data. So what's happening on somebody else's website that captures all that activity. And then third party intent data is probably what we're more accustomed to with account-based platforms, where you're sort of looking at like, people who are cruising the internet and like reading articles with keywords that you've set up keyword groups for. So when you're in that middle funnel layer and you're looking at kind of a mix of your first and your second party intent, these are people who are coming to your websites. Like if you want to pull it back to a second party intent provider like G2, these are folks who have been to your category on G2, and they've probably also been to your profile, or they might have made it to your competitor's profile and not yours yet. So you're starting to get the picture that they've moved from just being aware to being more product aware, company aware in their journey. And then of course we know like lower funnel from there is where you've got like the people who are getting much closer to purchase. So in terms of first party intent, these are people probably looking at your pricing page on your website. They might be looking at plans and packaging on your website, things like that. And bringing it back again to a G2 sense, G2 can show you when these folks are comparing you to a competitor, when they're looking at pricing information on your G2 profile. And then one of the other ones is on G2, you also have the opportunity to look at alternatives. So if I'm looking at a project management platform, like let's say Monday.com, on G2, you can look at alternatives, and that opens another world of companies who are kind of similar to what you do. So, but this is again, like at this stage, folks are saying, all right, I'm getting ready to make a decision here, and I'm kind of getting to making that short list. So I realize I'm rambling about intent data now, but when you look at you can see where people are starting at the beginning of their journey, going down to getting more solution aware, making their short list, and then coming inbound. I think LinkedIn is such a great channel to build out that whole experience with different types of ads, different types of messaging. And of course, like you can run retargeting between all of those audiences. You can retarget people who are making it to your website on LinkedIn. You can retarget people from events on LinkedIn. So just if you're in B2B, I think LinkedIn is a great way to make sure that you get in front of your audience. You're not harassing their inbox. You have the ability to get in front of them where they're actually really tuned in and listening.
I appreciate all that perspective. And I think you're very accurately capturing our changed buyer's journey that we all probably need to go back and say, have I really optimized for what people actually do?
Yeah.
Which then leads me to a question though, which is, what do we say to the folks that comment, well, the thing about intent data is by the time they're showing intent, that means you're not on their short list if they're not already talking to you.
Yeah.
To your point about, they've made their call early on in the process and most of that was in the dark. How do you combat that problem of, if you're not on the short list, you'll probably never be? And so does that mean it's a waste of time to go after those people who are at later stages if you're not there yet? Or is that just, time to really work hard at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is probably, one of the things I talk to other marketers about very frequently is not all intent data is created equal. And I mean that in the context of where you use it in a funnel. So I think third-party intent is like your account-based platforms generally is great to use at top of funnel when people are just entering and they maybe aren't even solution aware yet. They have a problem and they're trying to figure out how to solve it. That's the right time where you want to make sure that you've got the right keywords set up, whether it's brand keywords or product keywords, because these people are just beginning to become aware of maybe what the solution could be for their problem. I think where, and I've used all of them. I mean, I've used we have plenty of first party data as G2 for sure. I've used second party, I've used third party. I think one of the interesting things about second party intent data like G2 is there's two things. One, people don't come to places like G2 for fun. So if you're on G2, you're here to look at software, like you're getting close to making a purchase. And I feel like I'm saying G2 a lot. This is truth of any software marketplace. Like if you are coming to a marketplace, you want to know what people are saying about the products you're interested in. That's pretty high intent. And so I think that is your moment to make sure that you show up on the short list. And so we can show you the accounts who are looking at your category, the accounts who are looking at your profile, the accounts who are looking at your competitors. We can also show you customer accounts who are currently in your CRM and maybe shopping around, which would indicate a churn risk. So I think that's really your moment to make sure that you get your spot on the short list. You've got to use second party intent for that. A couple of years ago, we were actually shopping for a new performance marketing agency. And I think one of the fun things about intent data as marketers is we always have to figure out how to use it, but not be creepy, right? Because I think marketer to marketer, like we get it, but for people outside, we don't want to be as abrupt as essentially like sending an email being like, hey, I saw that you looked at this. Are you in market? Seems so, let me know if you want to talk. So we've got to figure out like how to have that conversation in a more tactful way. But I always think of this experience because it was so well done, but we were shopping for a new performance marketing agency. at that time, transparently, like I'd made my short list. And this was before I worked at G2. And so I had my 5 companies, and one day in my inbox, I got an email from an agency, and it basically said, there's been, it seems like you might be looking for a new agency. And if that's the case, it really would be a shame if we didn't at least have the opportunity to chat. And they spelled out some of their awards and some of their capability. And they said, if you're in the search and I'm right, would you at least be open to having a conversation? We can show you some data about how we could be a great fit. And honestly, it was really well done. It was a very, very, very well done competitive play. And so what I came to find out later was that they were using the G2 competitive intent to see who was looking at the other folks in the category. They identified me based on location as the person at the company who was shopping. And it was just a very well done email. And sure enough, I was like, I can't turn that down. So yes, I'm open to having a conversation. So I think, your point, Meg, about like, are there ways to get on the short list if you're not on it? I think you can do it with marketing. You can do it with sales. That's also one of the moments where I think making sure that you're sharing your intent data between marketing and sales, like, as marketers, we don't have to hog all of it. You want to hit folks on more channels than not. And sometimes it takes a sales touch. Sometimes it takes a marketing engagement, but it can be done.
Yeah, I think you highlight something that's super important there about that level of personalization that got you as a buyer. And I'd imagine there's no shortage of people reaching out to you. You're an extremely busy person. But the level of personalization that they did for that outreach got the conversion because they spent the time and they invested. I guess on that same vein, and thinking about, signals and intent to a salesperson who may have been burnt, right or wrong, with third-party intent, how do you operationalize intent or signals into either a sales and marketing flow, similar to what that example that you just gave? Like, how else would you suggest they operationalize it so it's not voodoo, it's actually valuable to a sales team?
Yeah. I think if I go back to that example of like what's kind of like a passive strategy versus an active strategy, like it takes both. And I think it takes both across marketing and sales to win sometimes. So the way that we have a lot of our LinkedIn campaigns set up is, when an account enters a certain buying stage or has taken a certain action, they get routed to the campaigns on LinkedIn that associate with that buying stage. So if somebody, if it's an open opportunity and this is an account we're working and hoping to close, like we have campaigns on LinkedIn that basically have customer testimonials, like research, why is G2 a good choice, things like that. So that's just one example of kind of a mid-funnel consideration purchase level campaign. So what we're doing is making sure that marketing is running the right air cover and benefiting, I want to say, like where those people are at in the journey. We're not just grabbing everyone trying to shove them down funnel to a demo request. We know we have to go on a couple dates before they're willing to take it further. So marketing does that, but also we share that data with our friends in sales. So for example, if we've got an intent signal that an account is comparing G2 to someone else, or they've hit a competitive landing page, we share that with sales. And so as the next time that a BDR or an AE is in a conversation with that account, going back to the point about, not being creepy and how we use intent data, they have the understanding and the knowing, like when I go into this deal, if we're up against competitor A or competitor B, I need to play up the fact that, we're a leader in our category, or we just had a major product release that they don't have, or we see X amount of customers churn from that competitor and come to us, and here are the reasons we see why. And so I think like I said, it takes that touch of both, like the passive, the active, the marketing, the sales. And it was funny, last week we were actually in a conversation with our sales team, And it was a campaign that we had run and not seen any conversions on. And we were like, man, that's really disappointing. This is usually a high performing campaign for us. But when we were sitting with the sales team and just we have our weekly touch base with them asking like what's working and what's not, they came out and they said, man, we just like this week we did a bunch of outreach around this campaign type and the conversations went so smooth. Like everybody was just aware and educated and like ready to move forward really quickly. It was so great. And the marketers in the room are kind of like, yeah, how do you think that happened? Like we hit all of these accounts with messaging on LinkedIn, and we did some emails, and like that's not rocket science. It's been around for a while. If marketing can get a couple touches ahead of like a sales outreach, it usually works better. So yeah, I think it just takes both.
Love the collaboration there, that you're meeting with your sales counterparts regularly. You're, comparing notes, you're learning from each other. I think that's great. Such a valuable and important part of the process. But I feel like sometimes marketers, we want to hide and be like, but we're doing really good things. We don't want to get yelled at by sales. But actually, I think no, having those regular conversations means they're collaborative and productive, just like what you just described. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I just noticed we're right at time here, Michael, and we want to be respectful because I know you said you got a lot going on.
Sure.
Maybe before we close out, let me ask a broad question that we're in the thick of a lot of planning right now. A lot of our listeners are doing the planning season. Is there anything in particular, any advice that you would give as a closing thought of how to think through, especially demand gen right now? And traffic is declining, and you know the drill. You're feeling all of it. Any tips or advice that you would give to the audience as we close out?
Yeah, I'm full of thoughts on this topic. I think, like so many other folks and other teams, we are having the conversations right now about how are we using AI. Like I think we started doing this last year. We've really scaled up our use cases this year, but I think 2026 we need to make the jump from tactical to strategic with AI. So what are the places and the areas where we can use more of it, whether that's gaining efficiency or gaining better insights? I think back to the point about building great buyer's journeys and also knowing that the buyer's journey is changing so much. One of the things I'm talking to a lot of our customers and prospects about is how signals are really the next version of kind of how sales and marketing teams and product teams also really even go to market together. A lot of the things we talked about, third party intent and second party intent and first party intent. And if you're a demand gen team just wanting to run everybody through the funnel and get them to the bottom as quickly as possible, you're going to have a hard time. And so I think the folks who are doing it well and finishing their 2026 plans are really looking at what are the sources of data that we're getting, what's the intelligence that we're getting about where our accounts are in market, in the funnel, and how do we build experiences that meet them where they're at and walk them through. Because I think with more people using AI for search and getting more data than ever, the question for everyone has become, where do I use it? Like I have so many sources of data, whether I've got an account-based platform or I'm using an independent intent provider, or I have second-party intent from a place like G2, and I've got all of the signals from my own CRM. Where should I be using that data, and what's the best way to get the right level of intelligence and make it actionable? Those are the hard things right now that I think teams are trying to figure out for next year. And I think other than that, there's also some classic principles here that ring true, like good messaging, good creative, good timing. I always say that the core of demand gen is getting the right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel. And I don't think that's changed even with all the other changes that we've seen. So it's kind of my guiding principle for right now.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Michael. Meg, any closing thoughts on your side?
Yeah, super helpful information. And I think you just distilled it down to some really good and valuable truths that, sometimes we can maybe move away from a little bit, but at our peril for sure. So thank you for that reminder. And we just really appreciate you joining us and sharing some of what you're seeing and learning.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Michael, grateful that you joined us and love that background of those unique masks there that are very eye-catching. So
thank you.
Thanks for joining. And then next week, Meg, you're flying solo, I think, for the next 2 weeks. But
next week we're taking a break.
Next week's a break. Okay,
but
gotcha.
We will be back for a very special Halloween show.
There we go.
With Barbie Maddie and Yop Westrick, and they're going to be talking about how to get your CFO and your CMO collaborating effectively. And they will be fresh from having attended an event for CFOs. So they're going to have lots of good tips about what's on the mind of the CFO and how marketers need to work with it, not worry about it. So that'll be a special Halloween show. Can't promise there'll be costumes or candy, but feel free if that's your thing.
Excellent. We'll see you same time, same place. Thanks again. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Meg or I. Like and subscribe in the corner. URL, the QR code will bring you right to the videos. So thanks very much. We'll see you next in 2 weeks.
Happy Friday.